Welcome everyone to season 5 of National Parks Presents. Today is our 5th of 6 presentations. After this, we have one more on March 26th. And I'll be sending that in the chat just in case you haven't registered yet and you're like, wait, before I forget. But then we will be ending soon. After March, if you're like, Karen, I really love history. I love these programs so much. I want to keep hearing. You don't need to come to come to the library, okay? Don't say I don't promote the library, but go explore the national parks. Honestly, City of Boston has so many, and the rangers you come and see here on Wednesday nights are also there, doing amazing events and programs, and there's walking tours, and there's amazing information on their website. I love it. It's one of my favorite places to be. And so please check them out. Okay. Just because our online programs are coming to an end, we noticed that our audience does drop off after April. And it's because you're exploring the great outdoors as you should be. So go check out the parks on foot. Please, please, please. Okay. But what this amazing presentation today that Ranger Ellie and Ranger Caitlin have put together follows our program theme, because the BPL is slowly, the past couple of years, we've been slowly marching our way to the 250th anniversary of the revolution. Last year, we focused a little more on the music side, and this year in 2025, we're focusing on revolutionary art. And that doesn't mean like it's only Paul Revere in like 1776. It means more about like art for social change, but also it does include all of our revolutionary Boston stuff, because we are the heartbeat of the revolution, and we can still be. Okay. Now, for boring Zoom features, you're like, Karen, you always go through this, but you never know. We could be having someone new here and they don't know. So just to let you know, we are recording. The recording doesn't go up immediately on our YouTube page. It does take a little bit of time because our AV team is busy. They are super duper busy, but probably in the next week or so, it will show up on our YouTube page. The best way to find it is go to BPL. Well, I would Google BPL YouTube. Honestly, it'll be the first link that you see. And we have an entire playlist on this season, last season, and the years before of our national park presentations. They are absolutely incredible. Please check them out. You can also skip through my annoying intros on them. Unfortunately, I am in there, but you can cut me out and go straight to the fun parts. Okay, if you don't enjoy the captions that you are seeing right now, you can turn them off. At the bottom of the Zoom menu bar, there's the CC button. You can click them off and it will say turn off subtitles, and you can turn them off. If you don't see them and you want them turned on, click on the same button and the captions will come on. On the right is our chat box. Okay, you'll notice that we don't really have a Q&A form. We have more of a chat. Ranger Steve is monitoring the chat, also known as Ranger Steven. And he will be going through, and at the end, he will pop up on the screen and ask your questions. Do not be shy. We love, love, love your chatting. It's so much fun, and it's one of the rare webinars that we keep the chat open because all of you guys have amazing questions and also answers, and you have really great rapport with each other. You do not need to be shy. We do ask you to follow the Aretha Franklin rule, which is to be respectful. All right. As soon as we're not respectful, then unfortunately you can't be with us. So you can't sit with us if you're not respectful. So just keep that in mind, please. And also notice the to form. If you are asking a question and it says to hosts and panelists, is the people you can see on screen. If it is to everyone, it is everyone on screen and watching back at home. And then at the very, very last thing at the end, when we all say goodbye, a survey will pop up on your screen called A Place for Your Thoughts. If you could jot down your thoughts and submit it, that would be great. And now, that was a long-winded segment from me. So without further babbling from me, let's welcome Ranger Caitlin and Ellie as they present art in the Cradle of Liberty. Woo!
Thanks, Karen, for that introduction. So let's get started. Let's first situate ourselves in the historic building that we will be delving into today, Faneuil Hall, known as the Cradle of Liberty. Constructed with the funds provided by Boston merchant Peter Faneuil, Faneuil Hall opened its doors in bustling downtown Boston in 1742. The first floor operated as a central marketplace, while the second floor, known as the Great Hall, served as a town meeting space. For over 280 years, the hall has remained a city-owned and managed building. And throughout its long history, Faneuil Hall has served as a place for Bostonians to come together in celebration and commemoration, debate and discussion, protest and advocacy. In order to continue to open its doors to the public, Faneuil Hall has undergone several expansions, transformations, and restorations in its lifetime. So to give you a sense of how Faneuil Hall has changed over time, here on the left, we have a 1789 sketch of Faneuil Hall that captures its likeness from the Revolutionary era. It was about a two-story building with opened arched doorways that lead to market stalls on the ground level. There is a closed second floor that housed the meeting hall and a finished attic space for office spaces. The cupola sat in the center of the roof. On the right is a photograph of a building approximately 100 years later, and we see Faneuil Hall more closely to how it looks today. Expanded by architect Charles Bulfinch in 1805 to 1806, Faneuil Hall doubled its width and grew in height to 4 stories. The first floor market space was enclosed, and the cupola was moved to the east end of the building, orienting the building to the water. So every change that the building underwent, including this early 1800s expansion and others that followed, has allowed Faneuil Hall to better meet the needs of a growing and changing Boston. Since the establishment of Boston National Historical Park in 1974, the National Park Service has served as the interpreters of this historic space. We are here to share the history of the building itself, as well as those who have met and gathered in its great hall. Tonight, I and another member on my team, Student Conservation Association Public History intern Ellie, will be taking a slightly different approach. We will be treating Faneuil Hall, and specifically the Great Hall, as a curated museum space. The curators of this space have been members of Boston's community, and in some cases, members with funds and power. These Bostonians either donated or advocated for the inclusion of different art pieces to occupy space in the Great Hall. Their curation has framed the visual story the hall tells, one that honors great local and national leaders and bolsters the status of Boston and the Great Hall itself. Yet there are some instances where other stories peek through. Stories of communities of Bostonians dictating who should be honored, claiming the space for themselves, or in the case of more recent efforts, trying to expand the stories visible in the Great Hall. So we will now take you into a brief dive into some of these stories, as well as give you a way to explore them for yourself. So I'd like to start by focusing on some of the leading figures Bostonians first chose to honor in the Great Hall. In this 1848 sketch of the interior of Faneuil Hall, we see a handful of portraits hanging from the west wall. 2 of the largest paintings are still in place on the west wall today. And they're the portraits of Peter Faneuil on the left and George Washington on the right. So when Faneuil Hall opened in 1742, members of the town meeting voted to name the building after its benefactor. They also resolved to install 2 portraits, one of King George II and the other of Peter Faneuil. A year later, they acquired a portrait of Peter Faneuil by John Smibert, which took residence in the Great Hall. Unfortunately, a fire in 1761 destroyed all but the brick walls of Faneuil Hall, damaging beyond repair the Smibert portrait. It took several decades before the town selectmen voted in 1807 to commission this painting we see here by Henry Sargent, assigning him, quote, to paint the same in the best manner and complete it as soon as possible. This painting continues to hang in Faneuil Hall today. Both in 1742 and years later, Boston town leadership committed to remember the hall's benefactor on its walls. But who was Peter Faneuil? Peter Faneuil was one of the leading colonial Boston merchants. He built his wealth from participating in the profitable yet exploitative transatlantic empire. Faneuil had an expansive network across the West Indies, Europe, Africa, and the American colonies, trading goods that fueled the institution of slavery, as well as goods that were produced by enslaved labor. He also participated in the trafficking of enslaved Africans and owned enslaved people. However, when we look at this portrait, we see it does not tell the darker story behind the funds that built Faneuil Hall. It only shows Peter Faneuil amid the trappings of wealth as a successful businessman, holding the plans for what would become the city building that bears his name. The second portrait Bostonians originally arranged to hang in the Great Hall was of King George II. We know that honoring the British king did not last long. So naturally, the portrait of a king was replaced by a portrait of the nation's first president, George Washington. In 1806, Boston businessman Samuel Parkman commissioned American artist Gilbert Stuart to complete a portrait of George Washington. And this is the portrait that we see today. Here we see George Washington at Dorchester Heights in South Boston during the Siege of Boston in 1776. He stands in military dress, about to mount his white steed. In the lower third of the painting, you can just see in the distance Boston Harbor and Fort Independence, which is now Castle Island. Stuart presented it unfinished to the public for the July 4th festivities of that year. Although not yet complete, newspapers already praised Stuart's work. The Boston Gazette commented, quote, "The painting exhibits, in the combination of its numerous beauties, one of the most interesting and splendid scenes of which the art is capable." Upon completion, Gilbert Stuart and Samuel Parkman officially presented the portrait to Boston's town selectmen for display in Faneuil Hall. With their approval, the Gilbert Stuart painting remained in Faneuil Hall until the 1870s, when the city council determined to remove many of the original paintings from Faneuil Hall. This painting, as well as others, were placed on deposit at the Museum of Fine Arts for safekeeping. In an interesting twist of fate, the city council commissioned painter Jane Stewart to produce a copy of the original painting. Although a successful painter in her own right, Jane Stewart was also Gilbert Stuart's daughter. She was known to produce copies of many of her father's works in order to preserve his artistic legacy. So here we see the two paintings side by side. So on the right is Gilbert Stuart's original portrait, which is on display at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And then on the left is the copy by Jane Stewart in around 1877. And this is on display at Faneuil Hall. And we can tell that Jane Stewart's version is a worthy copy, though you can see that there are some slight differences. If you take a little bit of a closer look, you can see some of the detail work and the shading for Washington, and the background scene might be a little bit different. So to move on to a third figure, we see that in addition to Washington, Bostonians look to honor the legacy of other founding figures from the Revolutionary era. One such revolutionary leader was the famed statesman and former president John Adams. And although the commissioning of this bust of John Adams was launched by local leaders, many members of the Boston community contributed to the effort to honor John Adams in the Great Hall. So in early 1818, Bostonian William Tudor Jr. proposed a resolution in the Massachusetts legislature to commission a bust to honor John Adams. When that state resolution stalled, Tudor turned to Boston to see if the town might proceed with the commissioning. Tudor set up a committee and began a subscription drive. Bostonians quickly responded to Tudor's call, so much so that subscriptions had to be limited to $2. In the end, there were 215 subscribers who supported the commissioning of this Adams bust. In March 1818, the committee formally asked Adams to accept this honor, saying, quote, "In behalf of a numerous body of citizens of Boston, we request your consent to set for a bust in marble to be placed in Faneuil Hall." John Adams quickly gave his consent, responding, quote, "As I owe to the town of Boston all the opportunities I ever had of performing any public service, This mark of the benevolence of her citizens excites all my sensibility. The committee hired French sculptor Jean-Baptiste Benon to capture the likeness of the aging statesman. In writing to her granddaughter, Abigail Adams called Benon, quote, a Frenchman by birth with all the vivacity of his nation, and expressed her belief that, quote, he will have an admirable likeness. John also shared a humorous comment on the process with Thomas Jefferson, quipping, quote, I let them do what they please with my old head. So we see the result of Benon's work here as he captured the elder statesman likeness. Although balding and wrinkled, Adams still maintains his stern gaze, allowing the marble to display the former president's fierce and determined personality. The Adams bust was displayed in Faneuil Hall on May 28, 1818, first appearing in a central alcove on the western end of the hall between the paintings of Peter Faneuil and George Washington. It later moved to its current location at the center of the stage. If we look at these first three examples, we already see the curation of a story, a desire to honor local and national leaders, as well as cement Faneuil Hall as a space to document and honor shared history. While the Peter Faneuil and George Washington paintings showed the power of the town meeting or town leadership in curating this story, already with the John Adams bust in the early 1800s, we see the participation of more Bostonian voices in determining who should be honored in the Great Hall. And with that, I will hand it over to Ellie.
Hi, everyone. I'll start by sharing the story of not necessarily a piece that shares a history, but shares a story of engagement in a moment by the youngest of Boston society. Here you can see above the balcony, across from the portraits of Peter Faneuil and George Washington and the bust of Adams, is this really ornate clock with gold wreaths, two seals or two emblems on either side representing the seals of the state and the city of Boston. And on the clock face, it reads, presented to the city by the children of Boston. This clock represents the participation in curation by children, the school children of Boston. The clock was paid for through their savings and the pennies that they collected. And on January 14th in 1850, a ceremony with songs, speeches, fireworks, and dancing took place in Faneuil Hall to celebrate the installation of the clock. The Massachusetts governor, George Briggs, and Boston Mayor John Bigelow made remarks, and around 500 to 600 children danced to the Boston Brigade Band in the hall. Newspapers recount that around 4,000 people showed up to this event. And in this clock, it's not just useful to tell the time. There's also a tin box, or there was a tin box placed inside the clock that held a list of each of the children's names that donated to the funding of the clock as a time capsule to be opened a century later. In 1949, Margaret McDonough, an administrative assistant with the International Friendship League in Boston, learned of the time capsule. She began preparing for a formal opening of that time capsule 100 years later, in 1950. However, an investigation into the tin box proved it had actually disappeared. While we no longer have the list of the children who donated to the clock's creation, it's still an important moment for us to consider that Faneuil Hall is remembered not just as a space for debate and town meetings. The bold text on the face of that clock reminds us how the hall is also used for celebration and public engagement by all of Boston's community, even its youngest. And then as we continue, it's not just those who are conducting the curation, funding these paintings in the hall, but it's also who is represented within the paintings that can illuminate the histories that the community finds important. And one of those is important to us still today as we approach the 250th anniversary. In 1940, the city of Boston purchased the painting covering the retreat from Breed's Hill, seen here. That was painted by Irish-American artist Dennis Mullen Carter in 1857. The Boston Art Commission unanimously approved its purchase, claiming historically this picture is of great importance and most appropriate for a place in the Cradle of Liberty. In the painting, you can see that the soldiers on both sides of the battle actually have the same face. While the face's identity remains unknown, the artist's choice perhaps comments on the intimate nature of the early battles of the Revolution, like the Battle of Bunker Hill, which felt more akin to a civil war between fellow neighbors, family, and citizens, rather than a war between distinguished nations and armies. This is not a portrait, but a scene, so it's different from the singular individual portraits found in other places around the hall, but it marks an important moment in Boston's history. As the painting was put in the hall in 1940, it's a testament to the lasting legacy of the Battle of Bunker Hill, which we still remember as a pivotal revolutionary moment. And also, we continue to connect it to other sites in Boston, like here, the Cradle of Liberty, where this painting is held. So in another act of curation or accidental curation, you can find a sketch of Abraham Lincoln in Faneuil Hall. It's actually one of two works of President Abraham Lincoln in the hall. The other is a commissioned 1865 portrait by Joseph Ames, which is not featured here. But the painting of Abraham Lincoln by the sketch of Abraham Lincoln by William Morris Hunt was discovered during a 1996 restoration of William Morris Hunt's portrait of Governor Andrew, who is actually featured in the stairwell in Faneuil Hall. Conservator Peter Williams discovered this charcoal sketch behind the painting of Governor Andrew, and then later on, other conservators discovered a second sketch behind the first, which was later treated at the Northeast Document Conservation Center. This sketch is believed to be a preliminary study of an oil painting that was commissioned by Hunt after Lincoln's assassination in 1865. The original painting was actually destroyed in the Great Boston Fire of 1872, so it's no longer with us today. Coincidentally, Governor Andrew actually originally encouraged Mary Todd Lincoln to commission Hunt to paint Lincoln's posthumous portrait that is now destroyed. In a letter to Lincoln, he claimed, "I am sure that any portrait of President Lincoln from his hand would rank among the best works of art." For the portrait that no longer exists, but this sketch, Mary Todd Lincoln sent White House storekeeper Thomas Pendle to Boston with one of Lincoln's suit, which is seen here in the photo on the right. Pendle, of a similar stature to Lincoln, posed in the suit for Hunt. This suit was actually donated later on by William Morris Hunt's wife to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. So here we see that the curation of art in the hall was not intentional in this moment, but it continues to exist in an intentional way. The curation, while it was on accident, is also important because it represents not just Lincoln, the president, but those who supported the presidency, like Lincoln's storekeeper, Thomas Pendle, kind of the hidden figures that play into the politicians that we know very well. And it also serves as like a lasting representation of a portrait that was destroyed. So like Lincoln, many of the other portraits in the hall are of important politicians and military officers, but there are a few that are of prominent citizens that are important to the history of Boston and the nation. One of which is seen here, Wendell Phillips. Wendell Phillips was nicknamed the Golden Trumpet for his abolitionist speeches given at many times in Faneuil Hall. While he is best known as an influential abolitionist, Phillips also used the Great Hall to speak on other social issues such as women's suffrage and labor reform. When Phillips died in 1884, the city of Boston found it important to put up a portrait in the hall to memorialize him. In a Boston City Council meeting in 1884, Councilman Henry Parkman stated, "I believe, Mr. President, that this is one of the rare occasions when the city government has been prompted to take official notice of the death of one of its citizens who has never held an official position either in the city, state, or nation. While he never did indeed hold office, he is remembered as a famous orator here in Faneuil Hall. He has a deep and strong connection to the space which he is memorialized in, but nonetheless, his admission is an important step in expanding the scope of works found in the hall. But not every attempt, desire, and wish to memorialize someone in the hall has been successful. Following the death of abolitionist and suffragist Julia Ward Howe in 1910, a committee was formed in the hope to place a portrait of her to remember her in the hall. She is best known for writing the Battle Hymn of the Republic during the Civil War, amongst other writings and influential writings. The committee, which also had the mayor as a part of it, planned to raise $3,000 by voluntary subscription, so not using funds from the city, to pay for her portrait to be painted. But this was actually met with resistance as the Art Commission turned down the request of putting Howe's portrait in the hall. The reason given for the decision was that there actually wasn't enough room in the hall, it was too overcrowded, and that the hall actually had poor conditions for the art. And rather, they actually suggested the Boston Public Library as a home. And later, it wasn't a portrait, but a bust by sculptor Chabal Vale Clevenger that was placed in the Boston Public Library, which you can see here. So here we see the Boston Art Commission acting as gatekeepers to this curation by the public and admission of variety of individuals in the hall. The committee faced resistance even though they had a major figure like the Boston mayor on their side to expand these stories and have a more diverse selection of paintings, portraits, and busts in the hall. However, while that was in 1910, more recent efforts have actually proven successful. 85 years later, Newton-based Massachusetts artist Lloyd Lilly's bust of Frederick Douglass came to the hall. In 1995, it was placed there, and it's, after seeing Lloyd Lilly's work in a Boston exhibition, the Boston Art Commission director, Mary O'Donnell Shannon, worked towards securing its place in the hall, believing the hall needed more representation in its art. However, this piece was created in 1994, but Shannon actually passed away in 1994, or this piece was created in 1993, Shannon passed away in 1994, and passed away before the city could acquire the piece. Her family raised funds for the work and secured its placement a year later. So on the bust, you can read the plaque reads, "Commissioned by family and friends to honor Mary O'Donnell Shannon, 1936 to 1994. So here we have someone who's coming from a position, Mary O'Donnell Shannon, a position of, say, power in terms of dictating public art and curation in Faneuil Hall as a part of the Boston Art Commission. But at the end of the day, her family and friends were the ones who successfully led to the placement of the bust in Faneuil Hall. Another bust that by Lloyd Lilly had also made its way into the hall. Abolitionist and suffragist Lucy Stone began her work in social reform as a lecturer for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. She eventually went on to lead numerous women's suffrage organizations, and she spoke often at Faneuil Hall. At the Women's Tea Party held in the hall in 1873, Stone called back to the revolutionary spirit of the hall and those who came before her. Governments derive their power from the consent of the government, she said, and she called to make it keenly felt and clearly understood here and now that the taxation of women without representation is as great an injustice as was that done to men in the olden time. She earned her spot amongst the patriots of American independence and became the first and only woman permanently represented in the hall's art in 2000. The bust was commissioned by Lloyd Lilly, who also made the Douglass bust, by the Faneuil Hall Preservation and Restoration Trust. We can think of her admission and Frederick Douglass's admission into the landscape, the art landscape of Faneuil Hall as important and an effort to have a wider array of individuals reflecting Boston's history in this historic space. We can think about how today, how can we dictate public art around Boston? At the National Parks of Boston, we work to preserve the histories of these pieces of art and the people represented in them. With our newly created Matterport scan, which Katie will be showing you later, we can further highlight these individuals and groups that may not have a voice currently or representation currently in the hall, and dive deeper into the connections that we have with the Cradle of Liberty. So I don't know if Katie, you want to jump in and walk us through the Matterport?
Yes, I will. So let me go ahead and stop sharing briefly, and then I will reshare my screen. Optimize for video, and let's share. Great. So as Ellie said, we have created a virtual tour of Faneuil Hall, and this will give you an opportunity to experience Faneuil Hall whenever you would like. So this is something that we've just added to our website, Boston National Historical Park. And if you want to find it, you can just go to under Learn About the Park, Virtual Tours and Experiences, and just go to Faneuil Hall Virtual Tours. So this came from work with a contractor a couple years ago to take digital scans of several historic spaces within Boston, within our partnership. And our intention was to expand access to these historic spaces. So we used a platform called Matterport, as Ellie said, and I'm just gonna go ahead and go right in. And I'll make this full screen. And so Matterport, what Matterport does, it's a platform that compiles these digital scans to create a full digital copy of a space. The Matterport platform itself is actually commonly used in real estate. So if you've ever done like a walkthrough of a home or an apartment, it could likely be using that platform. But what's interesting is that several historical sites and museums are using it to create virtual tours of their spaces today. So for Faneuil Hall, we took scans of the immediate exterior, as you see here, as well as the interior of the Great Hall and the upper floors to build a three-dimensional virtual space. So before we go inside, I think it is helpful to kind of give you an understanding of the layout of how it works. So if you liked kind of that, what we call the dollhouse view of that zoom in, you can kind of go to that view and move around it, and gives you a sense of the building itself. You can just take a look from the floor plan. So that's looking at it from a bird's eye view, and you can actually select the different floors. So it's kind of separated by different floors. So exterior, the entryway in the Great Hall, the gallery, which is the upper level, and then we have the Ancient Honorable Artillery Company, which is the fourth floor of Faneuil Hall, or you go back to all. And so you can kind of navigate it in a few different ways. And so it really lends itself to kind of a choose your own adventure, choose whatever experience that you would like to navigate Faneuil Hall. So what we did is that we have this virtual space, and the opportunity that we have is that we can create tags to kind of build different virtual tours. So the tour that we have right now is an art and architectural tour. So the idea is that we can point out different specific architectural features that make Faneuil Hall unique. So this is talking about the entryway to this space, as well as identifying the different paintings or pieces of art that line the walls of the Great Hall and the entryway. So if you go here, you can just see that everything is just an easy pop-up. So like if we wanted to go all the way over to John Quincy Adams, you can just click on that tag and be transported there. And just click to open up this pop-up. And if you want to view more, you can just click on view more. And what we've done we tried to, we did a ton of research to provide as much information as possible that we could compile to talk about the people as well as the pieces of art itself. So this is, we tried to give as much information as possible, and all of it's right here on the web page itself. When we go back out, everything is sourced. So if you ever want to learn more, you can always go back to the direct sources. But if navigating that way is a little bit tricky to kind of go click and move your mouse around, there's also these left and right arrows on the top right, and you can actually just move and just go kind of art piece by piece. And we tried to kind of create a natural flow for folks if that's the way that they would like to navigate this space and make that as well. And then if you want, another easy way to access or to explore the building is you can actually use your keys on your keyboard. So you can go left and right. You can move forwards or backwards. And so that might be for folks a little bit easier to navigate instead of with your mouse, as you could use your keys as well. And we do have, if you go into pop-up, there's also highlights. So if you want to go to different spaces, you could just click on a specific, location, and it will take you to that location as well. So there are numerous different ways for you to experience this and navigate on your own. And so this is really just to kind of give an introduction to the Great Hall, to Faneuil Hall as a historic space, as a museum space. And we do, as Ellie said, are excited to expand this into more opportunities to share the stories of the people who spoke, protested, debated, celebrated in the hall, and kind of figure out creative ways for us to bring those stories into this space using this digital platform of Matterport. So with that, I think we will stop sharing and open it up to questions.
Hey, great job. Thank you to Katie and Ellie for an awesome program. So starting with the first question that we have, this is from someone named Eric. He's asking, is there a list of donors for the Adams bust?
I believe in city records there are. I do not have that at my disposal, but I believe there is record of those subscribers.
Okay, so
I
next
will
question.
I'll also add to that is that in the Abigail Adams quote, she actually goes on a little bit more and says that there were so many people excited to contribute that's why they had that $2 limit, and that people would actually like put in the names of their family members in order to have more people to more people in their family associated with the subscription for the Adams bust.
Okay. So thank you, Katie. Hopefully, Eric, that answers your question. And the next question we have is kind of three questions rolled into one by Anne. So Anne asks, how did authorities explain the disappearance of the tin box in the children's clock? Was there speculation as to the reason for the disappearance? And who investigated and how carefully, and what was the outcome of that investigation?
In my research, I did not really find much mention of the disappearance of the tin time capsule. I'm not sure if there was even an investigation. The hall did undergo renovations in the years following, So there's a chance that the box could have disappeared in the process of that. I think that it was not known that there was even a time capsule in there for a long time. As someone in 1949 was kind of like the first moment that I had come across in my research to discover that. So I can't really answer your question fully, but I hope that helps.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellie. So the next question we have here, and it's just asking a clarifying question. Have we been required to change any of the website's texts with attention to erasing or downplaying any issues related to race? I'm asking because I see a text of your virtual tour. Peter Faneuil is described as being involved in transatlantic financial matters with no mention of how he benefited from slavery.
I don't believe there have been any changes. I would just say for the sake of the tour itself, we were trying to limit text, but I will also mention that there is links within the pop-ups that take to our other resources that talk about the full transatlantic empire as well as Peter Faneuil's role in it.
Okay. Sydney is asking, how long did it take to complete this project? How many people worked on it?
Yeah, so the what's actually pretty surprising is that the scan itself was actually pretty quick. It's a quick process. The contractor we worked with was great, and it took I think about half a day or so to scan the spaces itself, and it's literally just kind of like moving every few feet, stopping, taking a picture, moving another few feet. And so the idea is that has to go in a certain order in order to be able to construct the space itself. Um, and so it was actually, those of us who were there, we had to like hide behind different doorways and all of that to make sure that we weren't caught. But I will say that maybe if you go looking, there may be a little glimpse of a ranger you wanted to go see that we didn't maybe fully hide ourselves. But otherwise, there was multiple steps. So part of it is that we wanted to make sure that it was fully accessible. So once the scan was complete, we also then worked with a separate contractor to create a walkthrough video of the space that the contractor could then make what is called an audio described version of that. So visually describing the space for those who are blind or have vision impairments. And so that was a way for us to make sure that there would be additional accessibility elements built in because Matterport itself does not have that accessibility feature that we had to create that separately. And then we went in and did research on all of the pieces, the architectural elements, art pieces, and all of that, which took a very long time. Several people, Ellie kind of helped us kind of bring it home and get it all complete with all of her stellar research. So it was definitely a team effort of folks at different moments in time stepping in to help get this project complete. So it was a group effort.
So we have a bunch of questions rolling in here. Try to get through them. So Liza is asking, is there any evidence of children or youth efforts to inform art or representation in the hall?
I think the only instance I really came across had to do with the children's clock that I talked about earlier. Most instances of getting art in the hall involved presenting a piece or to the city council or having the city council commission the piece themselves. So I don't know if Katie, you came across anything else, or it was just mostly similar situations.
Yeah, I have not come across anything else.
Okay, Anne is also asking, how far is this from the famous shopping market? And I don't know if we can answer this fully. How much is a lobster roll currently?
I'm not sure about the second question, but it is so the whole area is known as Faneuil Hall Marketplace, and so Faneuil Hall is the oldest building, and then we have Quincy Market, which is next door, which is kind of more known for the shops and the different food stalls and all of that.
Okay, a question from Terry. Terry's asking, do you have time to explain the grasshopper weather vane on top of the hall or a link to find out more about it?
Ellie, you want to take that one on?
Yeah, so you can definitely find out more in the Faneuil Hall Matterport, the walkthrough. You have to go out, it's the first section of the Matterport on the outside, and you have to look up, and it's one of the little tags pointing up. But the grasshopper weather vane is actually one of the only original pieces of Faneuil Hall. It has been repaired. It came down a few times from fire, from storms, but it is also a time capsule like the clock. One interesting thing I will say about it is that it was used to figure out who was a Bostonian. They used to quiz people around, I guess, in colonial times, asking them at the ports, I believe, what is on top of Faneuil Hall. And people who knew that it was Grasshopper were the true Bostonians. But you can check out more in the Faneuil Hall Matterport. There's all the little right up in there. So definitely take a look.
Great, thank you, Ellie. And Judith is asking, when is the hall always open to the public?
Yeah, so the hall, the hall is open. So the National Park Service, as I said, stewards the building, the historic space of the Great Hall. And it is also, if it is closed, it's probably closed for an event. Or more recently, it's been closed for a restoration project on the George Healy painting of Webster's reply to Hayne, which is the big massive painting on the back wall. And I won't talk more about it, but it's a plug for 2 weeks from now, where Sean Quigley, Ranger Sean, will be talking more about the restoration project, about the Healy painting. So that's, I think, been the most recent time where it has been closed, but otherwise it has remained open for the public to visit and or for different events. So there usually are naturalization ceremonies or other, I believe lawyers have taken their oaths and different graduations and things like that happen regularly. It just hasn't happened recently, as there is a massive painting on the floor currently.
Okay, question from Jennifer. What possibilities does Matterport open for the national parks and or other public history organizations? This seems like an exciting development.
Yeah, I think it really is exciting, and that was one of the reasons why we approached Matterport as a project. And it's really to create, I think one element is to create access. So when Faneuil Hall may be closed for an event or for a restoration or things like that, we can still have Faneuil Hall available to the public. And those who may never come to Boston may still have access to this great historic space. Other scans that we have taken and worked with partners. So we worked with Revolutionary Spaces to take scans of Old State House and Old South Meeting House. And what's really cool about their spaces is that it also goes up into their cupola or their towers. And so those are spaces that would never be open to the public, just because of safety reasons. And so it gives people access to seeing some of those behind the scenes spaces of what it kind of looks like in the attic spaces, in the crawl spaces, to be able to see that and experience it in a way that they haven't experienced it before. So I think there's a lot of opportunity just purely for access reasons. Matterport also has different, I think we're excited moving forward. It has different features, especially as I said, with augmented reality, is that you could hypothetically, like we could create, if we wanted to poll Bostonians and who they would want to see on the hall, in the walls of the Great Hall today, we could create a virtual space where you could put on AR, VR glasses and like see new paintings cover the other ones just to see what it might look like with different people now that we are 280 years later. What is important to this community? What would we like to see there today? And what digital spaces create for us is those opportunities where we might not be able to necessarily physically change it, but we can kind of experiment and see and think about what it might look like in a different way.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll wrap up. I think we have one question left from Nikki. Is there still a movement to change the name? Assuming that name is referring to Faneuil Hall. I believe there was a vote to do so by Boston City Council.
Yeah, I know there has been a vote by Boston City Council to change the name, but I don't think there's been any movement on any actual change currently. I think it still needs to be reviewed possibly. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's definitely the city is involved in that.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that is a city matter, and we are here to steward and tell the story of the hall.
All right. Once again, a great program, and I will move this on to Karen.
Just processing all of it, honestly. Because I'm 37 years old and I realized what I've been always calling Faneuil Hall. Like I brought people, I'm like, here it is. Was the marketplace and not the actual Faneuil Hall. So I'm a little embarrassed. But now I know, and now I actually cannot wait to tell everyone my fun fact. This was amazing. Truly, truly thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us on this Wednesday evening. And I hope to see you guys again in 2 weeks for our very last presentation. I threw it in the chat. If you have not registered and would like to, it is called Liberty and Union Now and Forever. So again, that will be next week. And thank you again to Ranger Stephen for moderating and Ranger Caitlin and Ellie for a really thorough and amazing presentation. Honestly, I learned so much, and I'm still floored over Faneuil Hall. I was like, that's the building in front of Faneuil Hall. No, it's Faneuil Hall. This is why we have these continuing education programs, predominantly for me. Anyway, thank you again, and hopefully see you in 2 weeks. Have a good night.